Ji, Assalamu alaikum everyone. My name is Zainab and we are live with our very esteemed panel on this book launch on Bacha Khan, My Life and Struggle, which is an autobiography of the great Abdul Ghaffar Khan. Thank you so much for joining us. सबसे पहले मैं अपने सारे panelists का introduction कराना चाहूँगी so that we can begin with the conversation. सबसे पहले we have Dr. Gulalai Wali Khan, who is the granddaughter of Bacha Khan, and she is also a medical surgeon by profession. She completed her MBBS from Khyber Medical College, Peshawar, and now she's also associated with the Royal College of Surgeons, Edinburgh. Dr. Khan worked at the Postgraduate Medical Institute in Peshawar for 20 years before she resigned in protest in 2002. She's also a social worker and a civil rights activist, and she works for a refugee settlement agency based in the same state. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Khan. Uske baad, I would like to go to Ms. Munawar Humayun, who is the granddaughter of Qazi Atullah Khan, who was a stalwart and one of the founding members of the Khudai Khidmatkar movement. Ms. Munawar is an ardent civil society activist, and she's also a farmer, and she will definitely share her very important and very personalized experiences with Bacha Khan. Uske baad, we have Dr. Safoora Arbab. Thank you so much for joining us. Dr. Safoora is an independent scholar and an educator and an academic, and she focuses on non-violence movements and the Khudai Khidmatkar movement, and she's also working on a manuscript currently. And she also has a PhD from UCLA. Uske baad, I would like to introduce Jalila Haider, who is a human rights attorney and a civil rights activist from Quetta, Balochistan, and she's currently doing her LLM from Sussex on Shevening Scholarship. And she is very much active in the political landscape, as we all are very much aware. Thank you so much to all the panelists for joining us. I'm very excited for this very important conversation, especially because this book that we're talking about is one of its kind in the sense because it has been directly translated from Pashto by Imtiaz Ahmed Sahibzada, and these anecdotes and these accounts are very much personalized and reflect upon the politics of non-violence movements and the legacy of Bacha Khan that we unfortunately are not as aware of as we should be. So, सबसे पहले तो I would like to posit a question to Dr. Gulalai Wali Khan and Ms. Munawar Humayun, who've had very personal relationships with Bacha Khan. And how exactly do you think the legacy of Bacha Khan and his politics, his choices, his life, and his humanness in itself, how has that affected or impacted your own politics or your own outlook in life?
Okay, assalamu alaikum, everybody. Zainab, for us, it's a very personal experience. The one thing I want to make clear is so there's a almost 60 plus year difference between Bacha Khan and myself. And I'll share with you a story from my childhood because that is my first recollection of what Bacha Khan continuously said and did. So when we would sit down to a meal, he would turn around and say in Pashto, "Kam de luge marsho, meaning the whole nation is starving and you're eating so much food." And I must have been 3 or maybe a little more. And for me, it was, what is this Qawm and what is this nation? Maybe if we can find these people and feed them, then we can eat our food in peace. So even though we were so young that we didn't understand, it was a continuous preaching. It was a continuous education, just constantly telling us how much we owed people, how much, people really expected of us. And as I was growing up, to me, that was like, why am I responsible? Can you tell me? So in all that conditioning seemed to have done, whatever it did to us. So education-wise, you do realize Bacha Khan was very much into women's education. My aunt, my father's only sister, was one of the first graduates of this province. She went to Aligarh at a time when there were no colleges. This is pre-partition India. And it would take them 3 days by train only to reach the college. And she did her bachelor's. She was one of the first working women in Peshawar. She taught at St. Mary's. And if you go to our generation, I'm the first female surgeon this province has produced. And it's not because we're exceptional. It is because, for once, the men in our family gave us the same chance that they did to the menfolk. And, if every woman were afforded the same chance that we give to every boy, we would all be in that position. So for me, it was a foregone conclusion that I could not imagine not having anything to do, And so personally, I was inspired by him amazingly in the sense that, you know, I worked because I wanted to work. I mean, you know what government jobs are like, you know what they pay, but it was really, really something that was like a calling for me. So, and I think that to a very large extent, it was because of my upbringing. It was this feeling of having to give back because we have something. And I find that if people like him or my father were not in my life, then I would be like every other average Pathan girl, be married at 16, have kids, be a grandmother by now. But that was not what I wanted, and they let me be that. And both my sisters, I mean, all of us have been educated because I think the thing Bacha Khan persistently said that if you educate a woman, you educate a family. But if you educate a man, you educate an individual. And if we are ever to go into women empowerment, the only way we can do it is to make them economically independent, which can only come from education. So when all of us can turn around and say that we do what we do, or we stay with the men we want to stay with because we want to, not because we have to. And that is the point we need to meet in women's education. And I think he inspired all of us, me personally, definitely, to go out and do the necessary social work. So that's all I want to share at the moment.
No, of course. And thank you so much for sharing that, because it's such a personalized experience of how our own personal choices are very much influenced by political activists that we think are larger than life. But then again, you have managed to have that proximity with him that your own personal choices could have been influenced by him. Ms. Munawar, what about you? Because we all know that you've also enjoyed a relationship with Bacha Khan and you've had a very strong connection with the Khudai Khidmatkar movement. So how would you define the movement, having seen it since its inception and since its trajectory as well? And how was your politics managed? How did it manage to get influenced by Bacha Khan and his ideologies and his principles?
First and foremost, I would like to thank Sabzada Imtiaz and Shamdana for translating Bacha Khan's autobiography. I am very aware that Pushtun students all over the world and some history researchers do not do not read Pukhto. So this book has been a wonderful contribution to a window in, I should say, in our missing history. I won't go through specifics because I would like to set a background for this a little bit for everybody, even those who have not yet read the book. As I grew up, life was full of heroes. The Second World War had happened and the subcontinent had won its freedom. The huge difference was that the Second World War was won with all the weapons that you can imagine, and millions of lives were sacrificed. Whereas the subcontinent won its freedom through dialogue and simply without guns, without cannons, without airplanes, but dialogue with its own people and total nonviolence. The greatest amongst these leaders, the greatest amongst these leaders, these men of conscience, who offered untold sacrifices for the honor and freedom through the principle of non-violence, was Bacha Khan, the leader of the Khudai Khidmatgars in the Northwest Frontier Province. How did this happen? When he was born of a feudal family which was wealthy? What sensitized him to the suffering of his own people? The family tells a story that long before he went into politics or even thought of going into politics when he was a very young man, he realized that the madrasa education was just not was not sufficient, was not enlightening for the children, and he decided to start his own madrasas and later on the Azad schools. Well, the British took great exception to this innocent work that he was doing. And one day his father is supposed to have said to him, "Are you not aware that the Lat Saab, which was then the Assistant Commissioner Charsada, that Lat Saab pays us a lot of respect and gives us a lot of affection?" Well, I'm afraid that situation has changed. Lat Saab is extremely upset because you have started schools. Bacha Khan said that to me, these schools are a service to God. God doesn't need my service, so I'm serving his people. And for me, this is a form of worship. I will not shut down my schools. When his father was very insistent, because nobody wanted to be on the wrong side of the British rulers at that time, Bacha Khan said to him, and out of pure respect for his father also, "All right, I will shut down the schools, but since I consider this a form of worship, I will never say my prayers again." At which point his father said to him, "For God's sake, stop saying your prayers. You can carry on with your schools." And the schools carried on. Then another great influence in his life was when he supported the Khilafat movement and he was put in jail by the British. He saw the inhuman, absolutely subhuman behavior of the jailers towards the people who were in jail, particularly the political workers. He was very touched by that. Then he went for Hajj. When he went for Hajj, he also visited Egypt and Iraq, Syria, and the Palestinian lands. And he found a great amount of disrespect, if I may use the word, for the Muslims of India, because the people he spoke to said to him that the Muslims of India have fought along with the British Army against the Ottoman Empire, who was a Muslim ruler. And how can we trust you to help us or fight for us at any future time? Bacha Khan was physically a towering and impressive person. But he was a very soft-spoken, a gentle soul, full of love and compassion, with an unbending commitment for justice and dignity for all of humanity. He was a great humanitarian. He was a deeply religious person, and in his words, God proclaims in the Quran that to each nation he has sent a guide from amongst them. Those people whose hearts are filled with hatred, anger, and partisanship are far from the teaching of all faiths. He had studied the Quran, the Gita, the Bible, and was very familiar with the Granth Sahib because of the very many Sikhs who were in prison with him at the same time. With all these experiences, he was convinced more than ever that the Pushtun needs to be educated formally through schools and a system of dialogue so that they could understand the situation that they were in under the British. He also started a periodical, the Pushtun, for the knowledge sharing and information of the Pushtuns. What was his method of dialogue. He went from village to village, talking to people, sharing his thoughts with the masses in a simple message. And I quote Bacha Khan himself because these were very simple messages. We are Khudai Khidmatgar, but God does not need our services. To serve Him, we have to serve His people. Today, different leaders want to serve only their own sect, their own people. But we believe, the Khudai Khidmatgars, that is, we believe that no matter what their belief, all humanity are His people. This land, and further about nationalism, this land has been given to us by God for us and our children. The land is ours, but the authority over it has been usurped. That is why our children are hungry while the rulers enjoy it. Slavery is a curse of God, and it is our duty to free ourselves. This is only possible if we cultivate in ourselves nationalism, brotherhood, unity, and love. He was a great social reformer. He realized that some Pushtun customs and mistaken religious beliefs did not allow the Pushtuns to be enlightened and to progress. So he spoke emphatically about social reform in his jalsas, reforms that are as relevant in our lives today as they were at that time. In his words, I want to I want to reform the Pushtun and rid them of evil customs. And he based all these reforms on the Quran so that, because that's what he believed in and all that's what was acceptable to the people. What were these evil customs? He was against the institution of mullahs and believed that every Muslim should read the Quran and practice his religion himself. He was against the practice of revenge, commonly practiced amongst the Pushtuns today also, which we call dushmani, and all who joined the Khudai Khidmatgar movement were asked to take an oath of non-violence. Then the Pushtuns, as they are today, are in the habit of giving food as charity. Bacha Khan tried his best to convince them that this was no solution to anything and that the money that they gave for food should be given to schools and to the madrasas so that people would become educated. Whenever he was released from jail, his friends and family used to invite him for meals, and he said to them, give me half the money that you would spend on my meals to me for the education institutions that are being run. When officials traveled, as happens in today's world also, when officials traveled and visited the villages, the maliks, the mullahs, and the khans would convene jirgas and entertain these rulers because they wanted favors from them and because they wanted uh, to pay them back for some favors that they had done them. Bacha Khan found this a great burden on the common man. He decreed that when the Khudai Khidmatgar hold jalsas in a village, no one was to stay or eat in that village, but should spread out to neighboring villages so as not to burden the people who organize the jalsas. And I mean, his social reforms, I think the people who he influenced, who were influenced by them and this enormous Khudai Khidmatgar movement, they still adhere to many of the social reforms that he talked about. since no one has yet spoken about women, I will go ahead and talk about women also, which was, as he says, it hurts me that we have no respect for women. God has created man and woman as companions and are the two wheels for the carriage of humanity. People take walwar, which is they take if a daughter or a sister is getting married, they take money from the boy's side for the marriage. This is against the teachings of Islam. As a matter of fact, a daughter and a sister are entitled to inheritance from their father. We should not marry young girls to old men, nor should we marry girls and boys who do not agree to their marriages. Openly, he said, in my family, we ask the girls if a match is acceptable to them or not. But it was very interesting what he said to his wife. He said to his wife that and this is in his book also, that when men die, when a man is widowed, he gets married again. So if I die and you want to, and you are young and you want to, you must marry again. You must not stay as a widow. To which apparently she was horrified and said, enough of this shameless talk, because it was such a revelation for her. He firmly believed that no nation can progress without women in their rightful place, educated and progressive. Bacha Khan practiced whatever he preached. Eventually, women attended all the Khudai Khidmatgar Jalsas and what's more, supported their men to join the movement. His preachings, both practical and social reforms, had an immense effect on people, and the Khudai Khidmatgar became a mighty movement which gave the most sacrifices in the fight for freedom. I think I'll stop here now. If
Thank
there's
you so
time,
much. Yes,
if there's
I will
time,
come back to you
okay.
towards the end, for sure, for sure. But thank you so much for such an eloquent history and summary of the book as well. And that has actually raised so many questions in my mind as well, because now I really want to go to Dr. Arbab and ask her that how Ms. Munawar pointed out these different stories, these different anecdotes, these different political positions as well that defines that entire time and its legacy as well. So how do you think, being an academic, how exactly have we reconciled with this historical erasure that our children or children of Pakistan do not get to learn of Bacha Khan and his politics and the kind of politics that Khudai Khidmatkar as a movement had at that point of time, and the kind of ethics of non-violence movements that were being promoted at that point of time. So how do you think, and especially with women's history as well, as Ms. Munawar pointed out, that we don't mention women's histories as well, on women's anecdotes as well. So how do you think this historical erasure has somewhat informed a master narrative and its production, or is it something that has happened haphazardly?
Yes, thank you so much. First of all, I'd like to thank Bilal, Zahoor, and Shandana for inviting me. And I'm really honored to be a part of this wonderful panel of quite amazing Pashtun women. It's very nice to see a whole panel of Pashtun women talking about this silenced history, as Munawar Bibi very eloquently put it, and Gulalai Bibi also pointed out that this is it was mainstream at that time, and yet when I was growing up, I didn't. Of course, I heard about Bacha Khan, and those names were sort of household names growing up: Bacha Khan and Ghani Khan and Wali Khan, and but what they had actually achieved, I was not aware of until later in my life. And I still remember I was in Peshawar when Bacha Khan died, and all of Peshawar sort of came to a standstill, and everybody had gone for the funeral to Jalalabad, and the Afghan, border was opened up by the Soviets, and that was an incredible event, and yet we didn't know growing up the details of this movement, and it was later on when I started sort of reading. I think one of my uncles gave me the book, The Frontier Garden, The Man to Match His Mountains. But it wasn't very satisfying because it was a very hagiographic kind of account of Bacha Khan, like this leader who comes and sort of miraculously transforms these very violent Pashtuns. So it just was not very satisfying. So it's so incredible to have this translation now so that we can actually read his own words, which are very simple and very sort of full of candor, and speak directly to a person's heart. And you see that not only is it him that is persuading through this very direct and honest kind of discourse, but he's actually talking about something that already exists within Pashtun society. So it's not like it's a foreign ideology or a Gandhian ideology or a Hindu ideology, as they were accused of being, and that wouldn't have made it possible that every person in the province almost belonged to the Khudai Khidmatgar movement. So that was sort of the trajectory of my investigation into it. And then, of course, I read Mukhaliki Banerjee's book, which was, sort of the pivotal kind of, where she actually interviews the Khudai Khidmatgars. And you see that they took on the mantle of nonviolence so easily, and as a way of life. It wasn't just a tactic, it wasn't a political tactic. So that got me questioning even further, like, how is it that they accepted nonviolence so readily and as a way of life? And then I found out about all the number of women Khudai Khidmatgars that were part of this movement. And of course, that history was completely silent, even though this history has been silenced through political, machinations and the nation-state narratives and so on. But even within the local history where it is alive, I mean, for the Pakhtuns, this is a very resonant history, even now, even if it's been silenced globally. But the Khudai Khidmatgar women were silent even there. So that was like, that was really sort of got me sort of digging into that idea even more, as both Gulalai Bibi and Munawar Bibi have mentioned. There was a Pakhtun Risala, a Pakhtun journal that Abdul Ghaffar Khan actually started before the Khudai Khidmatgar movement. And in that, the women, there was a lot of women who wrote poetry in that, and it was published in that. And that was a huge contribution of women in the Risala. And not only did they go for jalsas and make speeches and so on, but they were writing in this Risala. So and it's very interesting to see what it is that they're writing about. But the fact that Bacha Khan saw the necessity of giving women a voice was a sort of a very radical kind of move by a Pakhtun political leader. Before that, we also had the Enlightened movement, the Roshniya movement, that also talked about women's inclusion. So it's sort of on a continuum, but you don't hear about it. And then once it does happen, it gets suppressed because of sort of patriarchal kind of frameworks. And it's very interesting if you look at what the women are writing in the Pakhtun journal. It is, they're not really speaking about anti-colonialism as such. They're talking about their emancipation from Pashtun patriarchy. So their emphasis, and it's a very radical kind of feminist intervention before this label of feminism, before any Western influence that you can say that was around. There was obviously none there. The influence was more from Afghanistan and Turkey. You see that in the Pakhtun Journal. They look at that because they say, here are Muslim nations where the women are free and they're being educated. So why are we being suppressed and not being educated? We're not being allowed to be educated. Education is considered shameful for women. Why is that so? So it's very interesting that they conjoin colonialism with patriarchy. So they point to the common ground of systemic violences, right? So they point to patriarchy and racism as the same kind of framework, and that is something that is very, like, even postmodern feminists are just now sort of making the conjunction that patriarchy and colonialism are on a continuum of, they're the same kind of systemic violences. And so they're demanding their own emancipation from Pashtun patriarchy so that they can be educated, that they can have a public voice. And the Pakhtun Journal gives them that public platform. And they want to, that public platform also erases the boundaries between private and public, right? That patriarchy erects. And especially in Pashtun society, you have to have zanana separated from the male hujra and so on. And so that they continue to have parda, they continue to be veiled, obviously, because of the societal norms, but they're bringing their voices into a public platform, and that is sort of a really incredible kind of intervention that both Bacha Khan allows, but also I think the framework of nonviolence is where they where this kind of crossing of boundaries between private and public is what takes place, so that they very much point to the fact that in order to change the outside society, you first have to change the inside. And the inside that has to be changed is women, and through education and to acceptance of new norms. And once you change that, then they will educate their children, and then slowly society will change. So it's a whole process. It can't be brought about in a hurry, but the women are the key to change. And Bacha Khan, of course, recognized this, and he says that in his autobiography several times. And Munawar Bibi, of course, pointed to that. And I have a quote also from the biography, if I can see if I can find it. Let me see. Yes, here it is. So this is at a rally in 1931. So it's very early in the movement. He is addressing a women's rally. And this is not in the autobiography. This is from the Pakhtun Journal, and this is my own translation. Today we are traditionalists and we oppress you. This is Bacha Khan addressing the women. Today we are traditionalists and we oppress you, but at least it is God's blessing that we have become aware of this and understand that your loss and ours is the same. And a little bit later on, he says, because you are our faith and our body and nourish our strength. So all of these, this is like very crucial to recognize what it is that he is actually saying here, that if women are not recognized as equal human beings, then the loss is also for men, because they cannot create that kind of society that they are envisioning. It's not possible for it, because the loss is theirs as well as the women's. So he is giving the recognition that yes, women are human beings. And even more than that, they are our faith and our body. So without the spirit of women and without their physical sort of companionship, society would not be could not flourish, cannot flourish, because they nourish the strength of society. So this is very, very, I mean, sort of even in modern times, right? This is very hard to see a political leader speak in this way. And another, of course, then the women. I just want to point to the women because you know, they're hardly ever mentioned. So the women that were very prolific in this movement and that contributed to the Pakhtun Journal a lot, and I'm sure all of the panelists here must be familiar with them, but I want to just articulate it so that others can know about it. Is Saida Bushra Begum was a huge contributor, and she was very educated early on, one of the most, and a poet in her own right before she joined the Khudai Khidmatgar movement. But and I'm sure Munawar Bibi and Gulalai Bibi know more about her personally than I do, but she apparently pledged her life to the Khudai Khidmatgar movement and didn't want to even get married because she said, then my husband will not allow me to participate in this movement the way I want to do. So her poetry is rampant, and I'm going to quote a share of her from her poem in one moment, but I want to name a few of the others. There was Majida Begum, who was one of the first contributors to the Pakhtun Journal, and she says she was one of the first who actually wrote her name in her after she wrote her poem, and that was considered shameful. Other women were criticizing her. Why did you write your name in the journal? And that, you know, this public exposure. And Ghaffar Khan responds to that in the journal and says, once you take up a public mantle, you will be censured. So don't worry about it. Just write your name and declare who you are. So there is this, so the platform creates this public exposure of women while they remain in Pagda, of course, and are writing, you know, but they are naming themselves. So it's not even just anonymous contributions. And then, of course, Alif Jan Khataka is a huge presence even now, and her poetry is generally she contributed to the post-war period of the Pakhtun Journal. So the Pakhtun Journal kept getting shut down by the colonial authorities, and kept getting revived, as did the Azad madrasas, the schools also. And the schools, of course, were all in the vernacular, in Pashto. So that was a great threat to the colonial authorities because it was counter to their education system where they wanted to sort of control how knowledge is disseminated and what kinds of subjects come out of that. So the Azad madrasas were a different form of education. So it's important to point out that it's not just education, but a particular kind of education that he was pointing to, because Bacha Khan keeps saying that in his autobiography, he says that when he went to the city and the educated elites, in order for them to join the Khudai Khidmatgars, they were not listening to him. But when he goes to the villages and he goes to the uneducated masses, they're the ones that respond to him. And so it's not education per se, but it's the kind of education, sort of this anti-colonial, a decolonizing education, if you will, a different form of a knowledge system that is based on your own local mother tongue, and so not the English Western education system, because that would just produce what the colonial authorities, the kinds of subjects that the colonial authorities could use for their governance, and not people who were resisting. And so I think the change, and I want to read this. It's a share from Saida Bushra Begum, or she was called Sin Bebe as an honorific title. Sin Bebe's. It's a fairly lengthy poem she wrote in 1940, but the first share of it has become very popular, and it almost has the structure of a tapa, and it gets repeated like that. And a tapa is a particular kind of verse that often women compose more spontaneously, but this isn't that, even though it has that structure. And Bacha Khan and the Khudai Khidmat keep using this share, and it's in Bacha Khan's autobiography. He uses it twice, slightly modified though. The form is not to the original, and I'll speak to that. So the tapa or the share of Saida Bushra Begum's, and I'm going to explain why this is so significant. I'll say it in Pashto and then I'll translate. Kanangyali zalmi pashashu fakhre Afghana jinake vade gatina. If honor-bound young men step back, the Fakhre Afghana, which is also a title of Bacha Khan, pride of the Afghans. So if honor-bound young men step back, Fakhre Afghana, the girls will win. And it doesn't say fight, but that's sort of the intonation, is that the girls will win this fight for you. And this is very significant. And this happens in many Khudai Khatmatgar rallies. This poem is recited not only by Bacha Khan to women's jalsas, but women then pledge to Bacha Khan that kan nangyali zalmi pashashu fakhre Afghana jinake bade gatina. And Nangyali Zalmi, honor-bound young men, is pointing to the code of Pashtun codes of honor, whereby a young man has to step up and fight for a particular cause. He is honor-bound to do that, and sort of a pointer towards Badal, the code of Badal, the Pashtun Wali code of Badal, where you have to engage in order to regain your honor. You have to engage in a certain kind of retribution, or you have to engage in a fight against colonial domination or foreign domination. And so here the women are saying, if these honor-bound young men step back, we will come into the battlefield and win this fight. So nonviolence sort of changes the whole terrain of how a fight can be won, and the fact that women can win it just as well, and the fact that that Pashtun Wali in a certain way is being reinterpreted, right? So Nangyali Zalmi are not the only ones who can fight. Nangyali women can also win this fight just as well. And Bacha Khan quotes this in his autobiography, but he changes it slightly. So he says, "Kada zalmon na pura nishu fakhre Afghana jinake bade gatina." The second misra is the same. Jinake, women will win this fight, but he changes, which I'm not sure why that change occurs in the autobiography. Maybe it's because it was written in 1983, and he sort of is writing from memory and didn't quite remember, or the fact that this had become so popular that people sort of took it on and sort of reinterpreted and rechanged the words a little bit. The meaning is the same, so I'll end there and for right now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Arbab, for such a comprehensive history and what we've managed to learn from Bacha Khan as well. And I feel like that I find this, as a young activist right now in this moment, I find this book to be very exciting because, like you said, it kind of shows us that the personal is political, and this entire personalized history of the Indian subcontinent, of South Asia, of Pakistan, of the community, of the Pashtun community as well, is coming from these stories that have been withheld. And because of that, I would like to go to Jalila, because Jalila, you yourself also are a young activist who has been embroiled in all sorts of change-making policies and all sorts of revolutionary rhetoric as well. So when we have a history of dissent, when we have a history of alternative politics, when we have leaders like Bacha Khan to guide us into that particular direction, why is it that state narratives or state institutions are so afraid of dissent, and how can we encourage the younger lot to practice this in the most non-violent way, as Bacha Khan's legacy has left us as well?
And thank you, Zainab. And it was such a strong discussion that I would love to hear more from Safoora, Gulalai, and Munawar, like the way they are explaining his feminist ideology, and the way that it really came in my mind too, that personal is also political. So when I have gone through this book, thanks to Bilal that he sent me this, but initially I was well aware of Bacha Khan before release of this book. Since मेरे एक कुलीग है नजीब काकड़, जो हम कोयटा में एज अ लॉयर काम करते हैं, तो वो हमेशा जब मैं बहुत गुस्सा होती थी, जब अपने एक्टिविज्म में सम टाइम आई वाज गोइंग outside of the box, तो वो कहता था बाचा खानी पुकार दे. So it was something like giving me a motivation that stay calm, have patience, और peace को follow करे, और peaceful जो है इसको process में जाने दे. But खुदाई खिदमतगार के हवाले से when I was क्वाइट यंग, तो हमारी एक कुलीग ही है और हमारी काफी सीनियर लॉयर है, मेरे मेंटर भी है. सो शी वाज टेलिंग मी दैट हमारी नानी होती थी, वो खुदाई खिदमतगार की वॉलंटियर होती थी. तो इस तरह से मेरे जहन में होता था कि ये था क्या, एंड आई वाज रिसर्चिंग अबाउट इट. अनफॉर्चुनेटली पाकिस्तान की जब मैंने ये बुक पढ़ा, उनके लाइफ और हिस्ट्री का, जो पहली नजर, जो पहला लाइन है उनके जो आबाई इलाका है हश्त नगर, वहां से जो इंट्रोडक्शन होती है, ऑल ऑफ सडन दैट गिव्स मी गूज बम्स के वहां पर भी एक रेजिस्टेंस की मूवमेंट अभी भी चल रही है हश्त नगर में. और फिर द वे ही एक्सप्लेनिंग स्टार्टेड विद हिज अबाउट हिज चिल्ड्रन, तो उसमें उनकी जो डॉटर के बारे में है कि शी इज होल्डिंग अ बैचलर्स डिग्री, और फिर अबाउट हिज ग्रैंड daughters के दे 3 are doctors. और फिर फर्दर जब हम जाते हैं, ही एक्सप्लेन्स अबाउट हिज मदर कि उनका क्या रोल था, उनकी एम्पैथी, उनका जो लोगों के साथ बिहेवियर था, द वे शी वाज शेयरिंग मिल्क एंड कर्ड टू द पीपल विद अ हैप्पी फेस. मुझे लगता है उनके लाइफ में जो इन्फ्लुएंस है एम्पैथी का, और फिर वो जो स्ट्रगल है, जैसे सफूरा ने मेंशन किया कि किस तरह से कॉलोनाइजेशन का जो इरा और पीरियड है, उसने जो इम्पैक्ट किया, जैसे पीसफुल लोग जो एम्पैथी में पले बड़े हो, जिनकी माएँ मेहरबान हो, वो भी जब कॉलोनाइजेशन का पीरियड आया और जिस तरह से कौमों के साथ हुआ सब कॉन्टिनेंट में, डिस्पाइट द फैक्ट दैट आई एम नॉट अ पश्तून, बट हिज आइडियोलॉजी ट्रूली इंस्पायर्ड मी कि किस तरह से हम पीसफुल रेजिस्टेंस के जरिए भी जो है वो डीकोलोनाइजेशन की स्ट्रगल लड़ सकते हैं, और आज भी लड़ सकते हैं. इट इज सो वैलिड. एज फार एज पाकिस्तान की बात है, तो जब मैंने ये बुक पढ़ा, जहाँ उनकी लाइफ की हिस्ट्री शुरू होती है उनके चाइल्डहुड से, और फिर पार्टीशन ऑफ इंडिया तक वो स्टॉप हो जाता है, उसके बाद उसकी लाइफ साइलेंट है, जो उन्होंने शायद नहीं लिखी या शायद फुर्सत नहीं मिली, उसकी जो भी बैकग्राउंड हो, बट इट वाज क्वाइट इंस्पायरिंग. उसमें डिसीव का कॉन्सेप्ट है, उसमें कॉन्टिन्यूअस स्ट्रगल का कॉन्सेप्ट है, मगर जो सबसे अच्छी बात थी वो ये थी कि हम जितना भी कॉलोनाइजर्स हमें रेसिज्म की तरफ धकेलते हैं, आइडियोलॉजिकल डिफरेंसेस के तरफ धकेलते हैं, जो लोगों को तकसीम करती है, जो महकूमों को किस तरह से इनका जो नजरिया था, जैसे लोगों को रेस, ये इनकी जो टीचिंग है, मुझे लगता है पाकिस्तान में अभी बच्चों को पढ़ाना चाहिए, क्योंकि आई डीपली फील कि पाकिस्तान में जो रेसिज्म है, जो महकूमों तक भी पहुंची हुई है, जो महकूम अक़वाम है, वो भी इस रेसिस्ट नजरिए से बहुत इन्फ्लुएंस्ड है, तो उनको ये पढ़ना चाहिए. और पाकिस्तान में स्टेट की सतह तक बाचा खान जैसे लोगों को ना पढ़ाना, मेरे ख्याल में उनका एक फेयर भी है, क्योंकि जो रियासत का बयानिया है वो खौफ पर है, रियासत का का बयानिया जो है वो पावर पे है, रियासत का बयानिया कंट्रोल पर है. When people वायलेंस ही टोटली उनका जो पूरा बयानिया है वायलेंस के गिर्द ही घूमता है. और द मोमेंट पीपल स्टार्ट फॉलोइंग देयर नैरेटिव्स ऑफ नॉन वायलेंट पीसफुल रेजिस्टेंस, तो मुझे लगता है कि इट विल डैमेज देम. क्योंकि टू सम पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू मुझे लगता है कि जब ये रियासत की सतह पर वायलेंस की तरवीज होती है तो जो महकूम होते हैं वो भी वायलेंट हो जाते हैं. जैसा कि हम देखते हैं कि हालिया पाकिस्तान में बहुत ज्यादा कियोस है. इसी तरह अफगानिस्तान में आप देख ले जो हमारे रीजन्स है जो कनेक्टेड है. इसी तरह आप इंडिया में देख ले जिस तरह से जो इंटॉलरेंस है, जिस तरह से जो रुजत परस्ती का एक अरूज है, वहां पर सारे जो स्टेट्स के बयानिया है वो वायलेंस पे है. और जो महकूम है जो कमजोर है वो भी अपना रेजिस्टेंस जो है वो वायलेंस के ही जरिए खरीदते हैं, जिसका इनडायरेक्ट बेनिफिशियरी स्टेट्स खुद होते हैं. दैट इज व्हाई सच पीपल आर बैन और प्रोहिबिटेड, और टू समहाउ इनको इतना कंट्रोवर्शियल किया जाता है कि लोग इनको नहीं पढ़ते. मिसाल के तौर पे हालिया जो पाकिस्तान में रुजत परस्ती का आंसर है, अगर हम देखें द ट्रू डेफिनेशन ऑफ इस्लाम, इट रियली इंस्पायर्ड मी एंड इट इज everywhere it is talking about patience हौसला सब्र. So that deeply inspired me कि किस तरह से जो ट्रू डेफिनेशन ऑफ इस्लाम है, हम जब इस्लाम की बात करें तो उसको बाचा खान के पर्सपेक्टिव से बयान करना बड़ा जरूरी है. इट इज वेरी नेसेसरी कि पाकिस्तान में जहाँ रुजत पसंदी जो ये बड़े बड़े बयानिए लाते हैं काउंटर वायलेंट एक्सट्रीमिज्म का, इफ यू डोंट टीच बाचा खान या उन जैसे नजरियात, आई डोंट थिंक सो कि इसको इसको जो है आप पाकिस्तान से कम ग्रास रूट पर खत्म कर सकते हैं. साइंसी एजुकेशन, उसकी तरक्की की बात, हर चीज जो आज हमारा डिमांड है, जो अगर हम देखें फेमिनिज्म का नजरिया, उसमें द इंक्लूजन ऑफ विमेन, हम देखते हैं कि किस तरह से उन्होंने अपनी तहरीकों में खवातीन को हिस्सेदारी दी, उसको हिस्सा बनाया. द वे ही चैलेंज द ट्राइबल सिस्टम, वो अब भी है, हमारे सबके समाजों में एग्जिस्ट करती है. तो मुझे लगता है कि 100 साल गुजर चुके हैं और शायद जो सबसे बड़ा मसला यही रहा है कि लोगों ने बाचा खान को पढ़ा ही नहीं या उनके नजरियात को समझा ही नहीं. इसलिए जब हम देखते हैं कि हर तरह से हमारा कोई भी एक्सप्लॉइट करता है, मजहबियत की, फिरकावारियत की, हमारे कौमी सवाल को भी एक्सप्लॉइट किया जाता है, हमारी शिनाख्त को एक्सप्लॉइट किया जाता है, जिसके नतीजे में जो एक्चुअल ऑपरेसिव फोर्स है वो हमें मजीद कंट्रोल में रखते हैं. बियॉन्ड दिस फैक्ट के बाचा खान की बर्थ जो है वो एक कॉलोनियल इरा का बर्थ है और उनका वर्क जो है वो डिकोलोनाइजेशन के गिर्द है. मगर मुझे लगता है कि जब मैंने ये किताब पढ़ी मुझे लगा कि आज भी हम कॉलोनाइज्ड है, उसकी शक्ल चेंज है, उसकी जो फॉर्म्स है वो चेंज है, मगर जो एट्रोसिटीज है, जो कंट्रोल का फिगर है, इट इज स्टिल वैलिड इन आवर कंट्री. और इसलिए भी जब आपने ये सवाल किया कि पाकिस्तान में क्यों इन लोगों को नहीं पढ़ाया जाता, तो इसलिए नहीं पढ़ाया जाता बिकॉज देयर आइडियोलॉजीज is not benefiting our states. Their ideology is not supporting the war industry, the hate industry. That's why they are not taught in our texts. They are kept away from our children और सबसे बढ़कर बहुत प्रोपेगेंडा किया जाता है. So that's the main reason.
Thank you so much, Jalila. I think the fact that you have already lived this on the ground and you're sharing those experiences, it's very important for people of our generation to understand how Bacha Khan is so important and how this book can actually facilitate this newer level of knowledge production as well. And I feel like the most inspiring thing that I have experienced after reading this book is that, especially in this somewhat fascist populist moment that the entire world is experiencing right now, we see a very alternative conception of power that Bacha Khan had, which is a non-violent reiteration of power that is so inspirational for so many of us embroiled in this political narrative right now. I feel like that the discussion has been so incredible and has really posited the book's importance, especially in our current times. And especially because Aurat March is also part of this talk, and how we are seeing that there's a new moment of women's resistance right now happening in Pakistan, happening across the world as well. So if you would all like to give your concluding remarks by ensuring that there is a message for young women's activists who are actually trying to create this newer narrative of empowerment and reintroducing it, how exactly can they seek inspiration from Bacha Khan, and how important it is to revisit our very, very important history that has been withheld from us. So I will start with Dr. Khan, and then Munawar Bibi, and then Dr. Arbab, and then lastly Jalila. So Dr. Khan, over to you.
Zainab, the thing that Bacha Khan managed to do was to change a narrative. The Pathan narrative was violence. And the way that I perceive how he did it was to turn the culture on its head. He taught the Pathans that in order to be brave and to be honorable, you really need to be disarmed. Because an unarmed man really has to be brave. And he made sure that people understood that it is a much more honorable and brave thing to do to stand there unarmed in front of somebody who is armed, because it takes an enormous amount of courage to do that. And I think that somehow, in order for the state of Pakistan at the moment, the most important thing is that all of us have this big ego trip we're on. Our ego trip comes from the violence. If we can change the narrative whereby we tell people that the bravery of actually fighting for a cause does not mean picking up a gun for it. It was so anti what is Pushtun for him to say that, to turn around and tell people that if you think you're actually brave, then be brave enough to stand up in front of a man and say, okay, I will not retaliate to violence by violence. And we preach it to our children. If my children would fight, I would say, why did you do that? He said, he started it. But if you do the same thing, what makes you different? The reason that you want to be better, to rise above the human condition, we must change the narrative. And the narrative that needs to be put forth is, come on, all you guys, you Nangyali and you really brave nation. The true bravery comes from non-violence, none of us have the guts not to retaliate. And I think once we can get this across to the newer generation, that retaliation to violence by violence is not the answer to it. This is my feeling. And I think that whatever the newer generation needs, it is definitely not violence that it needs. I think we're done with that.
No, of course. Thank you so much for that. Munawar Bibi, over to you. I think you're still on mute. See.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
I really don't think that I can add to what Gulalai has said. She has put it so beautifully, so succinctly, so clearly. But if you give me a little time, I would like to read to you something else, which actually should have been part of the first panel. But our friend who wanted to say it got cut off. And it is actually something from an official document, which I think will contribute to these panels. May I do that?
Of course.
This is Bacha Khan's speech in the Constituent Assembly of Pakistan, of which he was a member. The Constituent Assembly met after partition in Karachi on the 23rd of February 1948. Bacha Khan spoke on the 5th of March in his capacity as a member of the Assembly. He consulted some of the people of his jirga, of the Pushtun jirga, and they suggested that he should attend this assembly for two reasons. One was to familiarize the country with the policy, the whole country, the new country, with the policy of the Khudai Khidmatgar, And the other was if Mr. Jinnah was there to meet Jinnah Saab and clear any misunderstandings that may have arisen after the partition of 1947. But this is Bacha Khan's speech. I would like to make our position clear on the present circumstances. Please listen attentively. I speak with sincerity and hope that you will believe me. But if you choose not to, you can throw it all into the waste paper basket. People say that I am against Pakistan. Our difference with the Muslim League was that they wanted partition on religious basis, whereas I wanted a united India. But that issue has been decided now and is behind us. My reasoning against partition was that the Muslims would suffer, and you have seen for yourselves what happened at the time of partition, the slaughter of women, children, and men. The Muslim League was made to create Pakistan. That purpose has been achieved now, and now all parties should unite for the benefit of the country and the people, as this is an idealistic state. The situation now is that we have rendered great sacrifices to oust the British, but the governors and senior government servants are still British. As a matter of fact, some have been invited back for these posts. What kind of freedom is this? India has all local governors. Can we not find even one man in each province fit to be a governor? When India has even got a woman governor. The tribal area is still ruled by the FCR. Even the language used and the attitude of the officials are still the same. It was as it was during British times. There are still atrocities being committed. Corruption has increased. Pakistan should not belong to a few people, but all its inhabitants, with particular emphasis on the poor. Then some questions were asked by Liaquat Ali Khan, Firoz Khan Noon, and Mir Ghazanfar Ali. The question was, why do you insist on provincialism? Bacha Khan said, when you came to Peshawar, you said that from Chittagong to Khyber, we want to unite all Muslims. Then why are you afraid of the unity of the Pashtuns? Another question. Is it because you want to join Afghanistan? Bacha Khan. No, we have decided to join Pakistan. And if you support us, we would like the Pashtuns of Afghanistan also to join us. Question. What do you mean by Pashtunistan? The land of the Sindhis, Bacha Khan says, the land of the Sindhis is called Sindh. The Bengalis is called Bengal. Punjabis is called Punjab. Why shouldn't the land of the Pashtuns not be called Pashtunistan? We are not provincial. All my life I have been constructive and positive and avoided destructive and negative policies. In everything constructive you do, we will be with you. But anything destructive you do, we will not support you. At the end of his speech, Jinnah Saab gave him a tight embrace and said, having heard you, I think that I have achieved the Pakistan I fought for. He then invited him to dinner, where Miss Jinnah was also present, and said, the Khudai Khidmatgar are as close to me as the Muslim League. I know of the sacrifices the Khudai Khidmatgar have rendered for freedom. You and I will keep a one-to-one contact from now on. Keep on with your great work, and I will finance this great work that you are doing. Bacha Khan replied, that they had never accepted funds from anyone for the service of their own people and wouldn't accept any even now. Jinnah Sahib said that he was planning a visit to Peshawar and looked forward to meeting him there, at which point Bacha Khan extended a formal invitation to Jinnah Sahib for lunch and a visit to Sardaryab Markaz so that he could meet his other Khudai Khidmatgar colleagues. This meeting was put on the agenda of the Governor General's visit to the NWFP, but it was cancelled by the Chief Minister Qayyum Khan, who persuaded Jinnah Sahib that the Khudai Khidmatgar intended to assassinate him. A few years later, Qayyum Khan was removed from the chief ministership under the Public Representatives Official Disqualification Act, and one accusation against him was that he had scuttled the meeting between the Qaid-e-Azam and Bacha Khan. Since this was part of the first panel, and I think technology let us down, I thought that I must repeat it. Thank you.
No, thank you so much for doing that. And I think those are very powerful words that needed to be heard and needed to be included. Over to you, Dr. Arbab. You're also on mute. If you could just unmute yourself.
I was trying to find the button, sorry. So, yes, thank you for those remarks, both Munawar Bibi and Gulalai Bibi. And I really, what Gulalai Bibi says, it sort of really resonates with me about this new narrative. Nonviolence is presenting itself as a new narrative. But I would say perhaps not new in the sense of that it's from outside. And I think the Khudai Khidmatgar and Bacha Khan sort of point that out in his autobiography. It's an alternate kind of existing interpretation that you can make of both your tradition, both of Pukhtunwali, but especially of Islam. And Islam was what the women were constantly, in demanding their freedom, they were evoking a very progressive and enlightened Islam, right? So Islam was seen as progressive and enlightened and modern. So that is like sort of crucial, right? So the women are demanding their freedom in the name of Islam that came and reformed the tribal Arabs, let's say, the age of darkness, the jahaliya of the jahalat of the tribal Arabs was reformed by this very progressive, enlightened Islam, and they were demanding their emancipation in that name. And so was Bacha Khan. Was the nonviolence that he was promoting was very much rooted in that interpretation of Islam. So it's not at all a foreign ideology that that is constantly that they were the Khudai Khidmatgar were declared traitors and sort of by the Pakistani state. So this is very much within what I'm trying to say. Nonviolence is a framework that exists in most cultures, but we don't tap into it. We don't recognize it. We don't give it the value that it deserves. And Bacha Khan constantly kept saying that if you engage in violence, you are actually supporting the colonial government. You've become a collaborator with the colonial government, because that is the system that they thrive on, and that is the system they want you to adopt. And he has a quote in his autobiography, and that's in English because he's quoting a British official. And I think it's, I'm not sure what it is, but sort of it is a non-violent Pakhtun or a non-violent Pathan, because that's what the British calls them. A non-violent Pathan is much more dangerous than a violent one. And we don't know what to do with him, right? So this representation of the Pakhtuns as a violent people, as a racially martial people, this served colonial ideology very well. Here are the violent people, we have to deal with them with violence. And so Bacha Khan tried to make the Pashtuns realize that if you take on that mantle, that yes, and take it on with pride, that yes, I am a violent martial race, you are just serving colonial ideology, you're serving their politics. And I think we're doing that now as well. By taking on the mantle of violence, we're serving a particular kind of political structure, especially the political structure that's derived from colonialism, the nation state, the modern nation state, and especially in Pakistan, it's very much a derivative of the colonial political structure. And in order to really decolonize yourself from that structure, in order to liberate yourself from that structure, you have to oppose it with nonviolence. Doesn't just mean putting down your weapons and that's it, you stand in civil disobedience. Nonviolence is actually articulating a different narrative, as Gulalai Bibi said. It's a different framework of knowledge. It's a different framework of being in the world. It's a recognition that another person's life is as valuable as my life, and I'm interconnected with that being, and I would not want to take that other person's life. Because if I do damage that other person's life, or I do damage the environment and the earth and so on, it damages me, which is what Bacha Khan was saying, that women are part of us. If we damage them, we are damaging ourselves. Similarly, if we kill other human beings, we are just perpetuating the violence around us, and it will affect us. It will affect our children. It will affect the seventh generation, as the Native Americans say, do something that does not affect the seventh generation. You have to look at that way. So nonviolence is actually promoting a different way of being in the world. And that was what is so revolutionary about this movement. And we really need to recognize that, and how it is positing a different form of organizing community. It's positing a different form of political organization and a different form of social organization. And we can do it. It's embedded in our religion. It's embedded in our traditions. So it's not like you're doing something that's foreign to you or modern. It's the whole idea of Western kind of influence. It's not that. That's what the amazing thing of the Khudai Khidmatgar movement was, and why everybody sort of took it on, was they recognized that this is a more enlightened way of living and interpreting their tradition and their religion. And I just end with saying that there was also a recognition, especially by the women, that the change comes from within. It comes first from your own self. You have to change, and without trying to force the change onto others, it's not possible. So you have to change, and then you change your children, your home environment, and from there you sort of generate this alternative. It can't be just brought about. And Bacha Khan says this quite often: revolution cannot come about in a hurry. It's the whole process. And the process comes from within. It doesn't come from outside. And that's why women are sort of the key to that process. And children, I would say, right? So children, the next generation, and how you teach them is how you create alternate narratives. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bark, for such a strong and poignant message. Jalila, lastly to you.
Well, I would like to say that जो पाकिस्तान में जो हालिया औरत आज़ादी मार्च की मूवमेंट्स चल रहे हैं, और ये भी आई थिंक अगर हम इसको रिलेट करें बाचा खान के खुदाए खिदमतकार तहरीक से, जो नॉन वायलेंट मूवमेंट्स होते हैं ऑन द फेस ऑफ एट्रोसिटीज, जहाँ पर आज मुझे तहरीक के तालिबान का एक लेटर भी नज़र में गुजरा, जो वो धमका रहे हैं कि इन खवातीन को जो है वो कंट्रोल किया जाए। तो इससे लगता यही है कि नॉन वायलेंट भी बहुत बड़ा पावर है, क्योंकि ये खवातीन तो नहते थे, ये खवातीन तो सिर्फ मार्च कर रहे हैं, ये खवातीन तो बोल रहे हैं, मगर देयर नैरेटिव्स हैज challenged their entire foundation of patriarchy। तो इससे लगता है कि सब इकट्ठे हो गए हैं। पेट्रियार्की की जो पावर टूल है, चाहे वो रुजत पसंद है, चाहे वो स्टेट के साइड से है, चाहे वो इवन मैंने लिबरल्स में भी बहुत सारे लोग देखे जो इसके खिलाफ थे कि अच्छा ठीक है, हम आज़ादी को तो ख़वातीन की मानते, ये नाच क्यों रहे थे। सो आई सेड कि आप सरकारी सतह पर जब इवेंट्स करते हैं गवर्नमेंट पे तो यू पे देम और वो नाचते हैं, यू कॉल देम सकाफत, और यही खवातीन अपने विल से नाचे तो आपको लगता है कि ये फहाशी है. सो इट चैलेंज योर बेसिक नैरेटिव. तो मुझे लगता है कि वी कैन कनेक्ट बचा खान्स नॉन वायलेंट मूवमेंट विद दिस मौजूदा जो खवातीन की तहरीक है जो निहत्ते हैं विदाउट वेपन है बट स्टिल वेरी स्ट्रॉन्ग. तो आई जस्ट वांट टू से कि जो हमारे मेल अलाइज है जो पाकिस्तान में जो अक्सरियत आबादी है जो मर्द है या फिर पश्तून मर्द है उनसे कहना चाहूंगी कि बाचा खान का आप जब ये बायोग्राफी पढ़े तो वो हर जगह अपने घर के खवातीन का जिक्र करते हैं, वो उसको प्राउडली डिस्कस करते हैं. तो आप भी अपने खवातीन को ऐसा ही उनके साथ खड़े हो. देयर इज नो शेम, क्योंकि जो पैट्रियार्की है उसने इतना डिह्यूमनाइज किया है कि हमारी सोसाइटीज में अब वो अपनी खवातीन का नाम तक नहीं लेते कि सोसाइटी उनको कुछ कहेगा. सो स्टैंड बाय योर दीज सिस्टर्स हु आर मार्चिंग, वो जो सबके एमेंसिपेशन की बात कर रही है. और दिस इज हाउ दिस entire narrative of Bacha Khan will promote in our society.
Thank you so much, Jalila. I think on this very empowering and hopeful note, I would like to thank all my esteemed panelists for their wonderful contribution to this, to Folio Books, to Naya Daur and Aurat Azadi March, and to, of course, Ms. Shandana Khan as well for making the book possible. जिनको भी interest है इस book के से knowledge हासिल करने का, वो please Folio Books पे अपना order भी place करें. I think this is an exceptional opportunity for all of us to relearn what we have been missing all this time. So on that note, thank you so much to everyone, to all the panelists, to the audiences. And with this, Allah Hafiz. Thank you.